All right, so good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's program on the topic of spirituality and the science of optimism. Very happy to be joined by Kim Langley, who some of you may know from previous programs we've offered as part of our faith-based grant. My name is Matt. I am the Outreach and Education Coordinator with NAMI Greater Cleveland. Today, this workshop is the first session of 4 that we are offering today as part of NAMI Greater Cleveland's participation in the Pathways to Hope 2024 conference with NAMI National. So all of our programs today are on special topics pertaining to mental health, religion, and spirituality. Just a few notes. We are recording this, and it will be posted to the NAMI Greater Cleveland YouTube channel at a later date. We will also ensure that you receive the slides as well as some follow-up resources from this workshop in a follow-up email that you will receive from me. Please do remember to remain muted so we can control background noise. Feel free to keep your camera on or off, whatever you prefer. Please utilize the chat feature if you have questions. We'll try to wrap up a little before 11 a.m. Eastern Time so that we can address questions. And I'll also ask you to complete a short evaluation for me before we wrap up. So with that being said, I will hand it over to Kim to get us started. Thank you all for joining us.
Good morning, everybody. And Matt, thanks for the opportunity to speak on a topic that's very close to my heart. I'm going to go like a runaway freight train today, and you're very welcome to take notes or whatever helps you, because we're going to do a lot of talking about skills. And some people remember better when they write it down, so go for it. But you will be receiving all the slides. So if you don't get something, don't feel pressure. This is relax and take it in and think about how these skills and insights from research and so on might be helpful. And I will tell you that I really practice what I preach as far as optimism goes, and it has been a total game changer for me. I did not really grow up in an optimistic family. It didn't especially come naturally to me, and part of my own psychological work and healing has been to learn the skills of happiness and optimism as the decades go by. So I love the opportunity to share this with you. Okay, well, let's rock and roll. Wait, let me see. Didn't change the slide there. There we go. Okay, so let's start with a sense of humor, which is actually a very important part of optimism in my view. And that's why when I saw this, I thought I have to put this in because, we're going to talk about optimism, but we're not talking about unicorns and rainbows and always looking on the bright side. In fact, if we had more time, an hour is fast. We're just going to stick our toe in the water of the research on optimism and happiness and resilience. They kind of all hang together. But if we had more time, I would talk a little bit about toxic positivity. So if anybody has thoughts on that, you're welcome to put them in the chat. And Matt's going to monitor the chat for us so that he can say, hey, Kim, here's a really good comment. That's a good thing to do. If you are annoyed by the chat box, which some people don't like to see it popping up, you can put your cursor on the chat box and drag it off into a corner so that it's not irritating to you when it pops up. But I do encourage people to participate in that way because I'm not the only person in here who has some life experience. All right. So if you adulted today or put your pants on, you're already doing well. And sometimes I think it's good to step back from life. I've been known to write things on my to-do list that I forgot to write, but I did them just so I can cross them off. I think that's an important piece of happy living. So that's why I wanted to start here. One of my favorite working poets, Rosemary Watola Tromer, recently shared this poem, which I thought, oh my gosh, so perfect for our topic. And this is a woman who has suffered. She's been very open about the fact that her sweet teenage son, much beloved, died by suicide 3 years ago. And she's been on the most touching path, which she has shared in poetry with anyone who subscribes to her email list. And so this is not somebody whose life is a happy fizzies party, all right, but somebody who knows what she's talking about. So her poem, Lucky, I thought would get us off to a good start. And there's a good, healthy Ohio weed right there for us to reflect on. Lucky, like a stupid weed, like a persistent, stubborn, unrelenting weed, grown from a seed no one planted, It thrives now in the rubble of my heart, this unasked for, perfect, spreading, tap-rooted hope. And I love how this poem captures the ambiguity of wanting to be hopeful, choosing to be hopeful, not always necessarily feeling hopeful, but recognizing that hope is more than a feeling. That will be a lot of my emphasis today, is that we don't always feel optimistic, hopeful, even though we would like to. That's not real life. But what can we do to help ourselves when we are struggling, as my husband tells me, when we're on the struggle bus? So I wanted to, Seamus Heaney did say this. He was paraphrasing Václav Havel when he said it, but I really love this, and I would add the word only. This is one of my hang it up so that you don't forget this quotes, which is one of the ways I grow. I print things out that I know represent my growing edge, and I hang them up on a kitchen cabinet where I'll see them every day. When I think I have that in my bones, I take it down and put another one up, continuous growth process. So I would say hope is not only optimism, which expects things to turn out well, which is a good thing, but it's also something rooted in the conviction that there is good worth working for. And perhaps in our political situation in the United States now, where we've become such a divided country and mean in some ways, I think this is a very important thing for us all to remember. There's a lot of good out there. It's worth working for. And I actually signed up to encourage myself for 2 newsletters that you can easily find. One's called The Nice News, and the other one's called The Good News Network. And before I get out of bed in the morning, I look at them because I want to be reminded every day that there are people out there doing big, good things, like giving millions of dollars away, that never make the regular newspapers or news programs, to good causes. Or sometimes they'll have a picture of a bunch of guys who rescued a deer from a frozen pond. It's just, people are amazing. And I need to be reminded of that from time to time. So what I've been describing informally here so far is something there's a whole avenue of research on, called growth mindset. So if this interests you, that's another topic. We could do another whole hour on that. But if it interests you, Google growth or search growth mindset and just learn about it. There's some excellent TED Talks on it and so on. It changed my perspective a lot, and it helped me actually be more self-compassionate when I make a mistake or when I can't manage my emotions the way I would like to. I go through a slump. Everybody does, I think. The research of growth mindset really helps me. So here's a quote that kind of encapsulates it, and the founder of the growth mindset idea and extensive writer and speaker on it is Dr. Carol Dweck. And her work's actually being applied in schools in all over the country. And that's one of the reasons I picked this, because it's such an easy to identify with example. I heard about a high school in Chicago where if students didn't pass a course, they got the grade not yet. And from Dr. Dweck's perspective, that was fantastic. Because if you get a failing grade, you may think, I'm nothing, I'm nowhere. But if you get the grade not yet, you understand that you're on a learning curve. It gives you a path into the future. And those last 2 ideas are the best of the optimism research applied to life. You're on a learning curve, and you always have a path into the future. It may not be readily apparent. You may need somebody to help you see that path toward hope or optimism, but there's always one there. So we can cultivate a growth mindset. A lot of us aren't born with it, that's for sure, but we can choose it, and we can reinforce it in ourselves like a muscle that we exercise. So that's another whole avenue for you to explore if you choose to when this is over. So a lot of the work that I'm going to share with you today is based on the research of a man named Martin Seligman. His name will keep popping up, so you can read his books or look for his TED Talks, or he's on YouTube. He's he's a long career. So for over 40 years of research on the science of optimism. I like, should I say self-help? Some people have actually denigrated that term, but I'll use it. I like self-help that's data-driven. Everybody knows happiness, optimism, there's So there's a lot of people who can write a book in their basement who really don't know any of the research. They're just writing an extended pep talk. I'm not so much for extended pep talks. They can sometimes do more harm than good. But what I'm sharing with you today is very evidence-based and data-driven. So you can feel solid about it and you can share it with others with confidence. So from his many years of research, here are some of the data points that he emphasizes in his talks. Optimists tend to treat defeat as a temporary setback. We're under construction here right now at our house. It's driving us out of our minds. And Bill and I must say to each other at least once a day, it's temporary. It's temporary. It's very helpful. So if you get nothing else out of this talk, have it's temporary tattooed on your forearm, because everything is ultimately temporary since we are mortal beings and change is inevitable. Don't dwell overmuch on past failures. Optimists recognize failures and they learn from them, but they don't pack them up in a suitcase and carry them around behind them, because ruminating on failure is the enemy of authentic optimism. Optimists also tend to increase determination after challenges. And this was really given the what for demo, so to speak, when Seligman was tapped some years ago to work with Olympic athletes on their optimism skills. And then they were closely monitored, as you can imagine, to see if their performance improved. And it did. So it was such compelling evidence that optimism, authentic optimism, helps to increase determination, that virtually every athlete that makes it to the Olympics now is going to have training in optimism skills. So if you watch the Olympics, you saw the fruits of some of that. Optimists are also more likely to be respected and liked. Nobody really enjoys spending a lot of time with a negative Ned or Nellie. And as I get older, I love hearing my friends say, I'll say, how are you? And they'll say, I'm fine. Nobody wants to hear you complain. And I kind of love that. I mean, I want to hear how my friends are, and we give each other advice and help each other out of messes and make decisions and so on. But at the bottom line, leaning lightly on your friends and coworkers in terms of, complaining or negativity is probably a really good idea. Also, optimists suffer less frequently from depression, and they enjoy better physical health. And these are long-term studies that show this. This is not Kim making stuff up. Than pessimists. They stress less about life transitions, and they even tend to live longer. Of course, there's always exceptions. But one study that was fascinating was done with a group of women who lived in a monastery. They were monastic nuns, and the researchers came in and gave them all an optimism assessment. And there are many of them out there online, and I encourage you to take more than one of them when this session is over for yourself. Take these online optimism assessments, and more than one, because they're all designed a little differently. Some emphasize optimistic self-talk. Some emphasize hope. You're going to get an assessment that is a hope-based assessment developed by academics, statistically reliable, and so on. But we didn't want to flood your inbox with 100 assessments. So I just encourage you to search around and take a few and then kind of average them out for yourself and see what you're telling yourself by the way you've answered these assessments. So anyway, this group of monastic nuns, there were hundreds of them, they all take this assessment, and the researchers arranged the nuns from the most pessimistic all the way up on the scale to the most optimistic, okay? And then they just sit back and they watch how long they live. And generally, the optimists outlive the pessimists. That's because pessimism increases stress, and stress increases wear and tear on the body. So when you think about it, it's really not rocket science. So one of the quotes that I love, I've written in my journal, I've posted on my cupboard, is this one by Sarah von Bresnock, who had a really big moment some years back when she wrote a bunch of books that I still find interesting, but you know how these things come and go and cycle and so on. So a lot of people don't even know who she is anymore. But she's still alive and her wisdom stands up in my view. But this quote changed me. What if you began to expect the best from any situation? Just ask yourself that question for a second. What if you began to expect the best? Now, are you going to be disappointed sometimes? Absolutely. But what changed for me was that I expected the best until people show me otherwise. So I'm not naive by any stretch. I mean, I'm friendly, but I'm not naive. And and people better not confuse niceness on my part with weakness, because I will be able to assert myself. But people show you who they are, and then you should believe them. All right. So if they're mean or untrustworthy or backstabbing once, okay, they've showed you who you are. You're not naive. But when you go into situations expecting the best, people often rise to the occasion. Give them your best and they often give it back. That's my experience. We could, of course, probably argue or have a long conversation if time permitted. You're welcome to make comments in the chat. If you disagree with me, you're always welcome to respectfully disagree or to exercise a yeah, but what about? Okay. But my yeah, but is until they show me who they are differently, and then I treat them accordingly. So these questions I just loved. Isn't it possible that you could write new chapters in your life with happy endings? Suspend your disbelief. Take a leap of faith. After all, what have you got to lose but misery and lack? That'd be a question worth coming back to, in my view. If you're a journal keeper, or if you meditate, or a person of prayer, I think those are prayerful questions personally. So this, again, sense of humor. This was drawn by somebody with way too much time on their hands. So take a good look at this drawing for a second. And now I'm going to turn it upside down. All right. And the person who drew it published it just like this. When you feel like this, do an about face. Want to see it again? It's a very clever drawing, actually. When you feel like this, same drawing upside down, do an about face. And believe it or not, this kind of earthy wisdom, comedic wisdom by some unknown artist, is well borne out by research. So this is a picture from an actual study that was done. And the interest of the researcher was, how does the brain eavesdrop on the body? Does it? And how does it? And so these people had pencils in their mouths because the researchers walked around and gave people new pencils that were cleaned. And they asked them to assess their own mood on a scale of 1 to 10. How optimistic do you feel right now? People would give themselves a private number. And then they would say, okay, now put this pencil in your mouth with the point sticking out. So if you're willing, make a face with me like you would if you were sitting like the person on the right of your screen here. Mm. So this, because they're holding the pencil for 5 minutes. All right. So they're pretty puckered by the end of 5 minutes. A lot of people, their whole faces had drawn down. And they then were asked, what's your mood now after 5 minutes of holding a pencil like this? And what do you think happened? It went down because they had activated all the muscles that say, oh, we're not happy. We're pouting, or we're miserable, or we're something. Okay. And because the brain eavesdrops on the body, the mood, and they believe the brain chemistry can actually shift to respond to what the feedback of the body is. On a separate occasion, the researchers had these folks put a pencil in their mouth this way, which now you're smart enough to know activated all their smile muscles without ever using words that had valence, like smile, frown, etc. They didn't want to prejudice people. That's why they used the pencil. And their mood went up. So one of the things I learned from that is, if I'm agitated and I say, girl, you need to take yourself out for a walk, I need to relax my face and have soft eyes and look up at the trees, the squirrels, the snow on the branches, the rain, the colors of the bark, the whatever it is, the clouds. And honestly, this is typical of the way I was brought up. I used to look at the sidewalk, always worrying I was going to trip over something. I still glance at the sidewalk. I'm a lady of a certain age, but I don't stare at it because there's beauty out there and it's very refreshing, I have learned. And when I start walking briskly and giving my brain signals, things are looking up, I find that my mood usually improves. Now, I'm not talking about clinical depression here, something that we need to take. Well, I do take actually medication for depression, but it's very managed, which I'm lucky, I know. And I'm not embarrassed to say that. I'm grateful that we live in the age we do. So I'm not talking about these crippling depressions where you really have to put a bottom under it with medication. Walking around looking at squirrels isn't going to fix that. But if you're doing your other work, it makes a huge difference. All right, then, so I'll conclude this little section with my idea of that there is a spiritual wisdom in the body. And I really like this quote, and you'll be getting it in the slide, so you can ruminate on it if you want to. This speaker said, there is a wisdom at work in the cosmos that vastly transcends any human understanding. I would say this is a person of faith. This wisdom is at work in our bodies as well. And we may, of course, view our bodies as simply carrying out the program that's imprinted in the genes. But to this speaker, it seemed, on the contrary, the wisdom of the body is a measure of creativity in our cells, as well as a wisdom that works in and through them to accomplish the miracle of the human body. So this is somebody who's asking us to dwell on the fact that if you believe in our creator, however you understand that creator to have worked us out, there is something miraculous about the way we're put together. And there's still so many mysteries about the body. And so John Cobb said, if we attend to that wisdom, which is not something that's really promoted in Western culture, we're go, 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 do, bigger, better, faster. But some other cultures are much better at it, and we can learn from them. There's also a wonderful book called Focusing. Maybe jot that down. It's not in the presentation. But I know my husband has used it to really good effect. And focusing is used by some psychologists and some kind of spiritual folk to pay attention to an area of the body that's like trying to tell you something. And I think John Cobb would say that's spiritual work. So if we attend to that wisdom, we can trust it and we can learn from it. Our bodies embody a wisdom not available to us otherwise. And of course, if you're familiar at all with trauma research, a burgeoning field of research, there's increasing evidence that trauma absolutely is held in the body and that the body must be consulted as part of any healing process. Excuse me. So bodies are not objects to be manipulated and controlled, but partners in our life with God, as you might understand the word God. I mean, that's something you could really spend some time chewing over. Now, what about gut feelings and the wisdom of the body? So I believe in gut feelings, but only to a degree. So I want to give a quick exception to the rules, so to speak. I absolutely consult my gut and my body, especially when making a big decision. But if you are a child of trauma, if you have an illness like I do, anxiety or occasional depression, your gut feelings can be very misleading because your brain is informed by whatever traumas you've experienced or whatever kind of wacky chemical imbalances might be running around up there. And so I have learned to consult my gut feelings and then also question them. What's the evidence for that? More on that in a bit. All right. So gut feelings aren't always the be all end all. It's also a partnership between the rational, the mind that does research, and then the body and the memories and the feelings that it has. Okay. There's a whole, if you want to know more about that, there's a whole fascinating area of research on that. So here's some good news. For a long, long time, we in the United States, we were described by many who came to visit us early in our history as a pretty optimistic culture. And Thomas Edison was a national hero, really big national hero for a reason. And this kind of exemplifies why. One of his quotes, when he was asked 1,000,000 times how near he was to perfecting the electric light bulb, because he was famous by that time and he had a whole bunch of researchers working with him and he was probably pestered by the press all the time. And he said, they'd say, do you have any results yet? Results? Why, man, I've gotten a lot of results. I know several thousand things that don't work. I find this deeply comforting. I hope you do too. Sometimes when I've tried more than one solution to a problem and I don't have one yet, I think about Edison. Well, if he wasn't such a persistent guy, we'd all be like living by candlelight. Also, 1,000 things that don't work are still a step closer to a solution. This is one of my big hanging ups and get it in your bone quotes. Never a failure, always a lesson. I was lucky to have a mentor early in my life who said to me, look, did one of those eyeball things and said, don't waste your pain. Don't waste your pain. Game changer for me. And that's when I adopted, not necessarily a failure, but always a lesson. So another famous but not as well-known person now, this man was the Secretary General of the United Nations. So you can imagine how much garbage he saw in the world and how much piddly fussing came across his desk, Dag Hammarskjöld. But in his journal, I think it was published posthumously, actually. I'm not positive about that. But I was very struck by the spiritual nature of this quote. For all that has been, thanks. For all that will be, yes. I try to live this way when I can. It has resulted in a lot of joy for me. That's why I share it with you. And notice how he doesn't mention who he is saying yes or thanks to. He seemed to have a spirituality that was, there's something bigger out there than myself. I don't exactly understand what it is, but I'm grateful to it. And then Deepak Chopra, who is probably known to most of you, he's a physician who's done a lot of mental health work. Sometimes I don't always agree. I think some of his things can be woo woo, but I do think he had it right when he said this. Before the art of medicine comes the art of belief. The art of belief's been around for even longer than the art of medicine. So now to get into the meat of optimism research and how we can apply it to ourselves. Martin Seligman, there's the name I promised you. Read some of his stuff, watch his talks. He's great. He's a really interesting man. And he taught for a long time at the University of Pennsylvania. And he would, of course, use his students as his willing guinea pigs. And so he had 500 members of the incoming class that were willing to take a score on a test of optimism right before their academic career in college started. And they found that the scores on their optimism test were better predictors of the actual grades they were going to get at the end by the end of their freshman year than either their SAT scores or their high school grades. Now that is remarkable because in general, past performance is the best predictor of future performance. You can argue there are some flaws in the SATs, or I would, but generally people with big SAT scores are smart and generally they're good test takers too. That's where the flaw is. And generally they do well in college. But the optimism scores for the first year, when you're really in the meat grinder, trying to make friends and live apart for the first time from your family and do your own laundry and organize your time completely and so on. There's a lot of extra stresses to first year in college. And I thought he was a genius to take a look at that. So what we learn is that college entrance exams measure talent, but explanatory style, which I'm going to lay out for you in a minute, tells you who gives up. And it's the combination of reasonable talent, just reasonable talent, not necessarily exceptional talent. Lucky for me, since I am not an exceptional talent. Probably most of us aren't. The combination of reasonable talent and the ability to keep going in the face of defeat, that's what leads to success. And this came down to real simple things like you get the roommate from hell assigned to you. They think, oh, the weekend starts on Wednesday. They're out partying every night. They're asking you, come on, don't be such a stuck in the mud. You know, what a nerd. Come on out drinking with me on Wednesday night. And people with good optimism skills will say, you know what? It takes time to make friends when you go to college. I don't have to do what my roommate does in order to be social being and so on. But a pessimist is more likely to say, I better go with him or her or them because otherwise everyone will see me as a nerd. All right. And then you can see how heavy drinking the first year might impact your grades. You know, so that's just a little example of how it all plays out. Now, one disclaimer, because nothing's ever either or usually not either or. Carol Whalen, whose work I really respect, her work on optimism and kids found that naive optimism, which sadly some kids take right into adulthood, can be disastrous because naive optimism functions more like wishful thinking and doesn't confer the positive benefits associated with studies of adult hopefulness. In other words, a 7-year-old might watch a Superman movie, climb up on the garage with a red blanket tied around his shoulders and say, I'm Superman, and jump off, and that is not going to end well. All right. So that's naive optimism. Alcoholics that I have known and loved will often make what's called in the biz the geographic cure. I'm so unhappy now. My drinking is out of control. But if I moved to a sunnier state where it's always beautiful weather, things would get better. Well, everywhere you go, you're there, you know. So unless you really get recovery help, you're going to be the same drinker in Arizona that you were in Ohio, for example. That's naive optimism, and it's not helpful. In fact, that's costs the alcoholic a lot of money to move to Arizona, and then they have the same situation there, unless they get treatment, of course. If Arizona is your ticket to treatment, go for it. So for a long time, I had this hanging up in my house, don't ever get up, because I found it amusing. I love that the frog has his hands around the stork's throat, thinking, as long as I have my hands around his throat, I can't go down, so I like that. I love that kind of persistence. But I've learned as I get older, don't ever give up. I don't think I agree with that. Sometimes you try this, you try that, you try this, and you don't have a talent for that thing, or the economy isn't right to start a business, or they're not hiring in your field. Like it's really dead. And you might have to retrain to do something else. So I don't believe in don't ever give up, but I think what I might like to hear that frog saying is don't easily give up. Really enter into discernment. Consult other wise figures in your life. Get a coach, see a therapist. Sometimes you have to give up, or it's the prudent thing to give up, but most likely not.
Hold on, everyone. Having some technical difficulties. I will see if we can get Kim back here in a moment. Hold on 1 second. All right, she's coming back now. Hopefully.
I so humbly apologize. Remember, I was saying we're under construction? Somebody turned off a breaker. Optimistically.
We will, yep, yeah, and yet we are persistent. So here we go.
Yes, we are. We absolutely are. Oh my goodness. Um, my laptop ran on a battery for a while, and then it stopped. So I'm sorry, I have to reboot. I humbly apologize. Let's see if this is open. Isn't this just like life? Laptop's running a little slow too because it did a shutdown, so it's not pulling things up as fast as I would like it to. But
Trying to remember what slide you were
I know. Thank you. See if you can. I think I'll remember when I see it. I can just get it pulled up again. Heavens to Betsy. This is the first time this has ever happened to me. When I write my memoirs, you'll be in it.
Well, we are a low-key group, so no
I,
worries.
I appreciate that. I I had a minute of, oh my gosh, like that catastrophic failure that comes over you. And then I talked myself out of it pretty quick because I've been with your groups before and I know they're awesome and probably very forgiving. All right, here we are. See, we did it. Okay, current slide. Yahoo! Okay, so to wrap up those thoughts about not ever and when do you know how to give up, I think the key, at least my own experience.
Kim, we don't see the slides.
Oh, you don't? I'm so sorry. Thanks for telling me. Okay, where's my little screen share here? Here we go. I think I forgot to screen share in my eagerness to rock and roll again. Okay. How about now?
Yeah, as long as you go into slideshow mode. Right now we're seeing, there we go. Yep.
There we go.
We are good.
Okay. Yay. So in my own life, the research would probably bear this out, is the key is to think about discernment and balance. So to know how and when to say that's not working, we need to try something else, or I need to give it another try, or I've learned enough that I can make it work next time, and so on. So I would say healthy spirituality helps us to grow in the ability to be less self-deluded, which the research shows we have an immense capacity for, a sadly immense capacity for self-delusion. More able to discern when persistence is the answer and when it's time to accept reality and make a new plan. So I'm going to move on from this, but honestly, I think this might be one of the most important aspects of optimism research, that we find a balance between the picture that just showed up, never underestimate the power of persistence. I mean, imagine that dandelion making it up through the asphalt. But then also this quote, which is among my all-time favorites, Byron Katie's, kind of the central tenet of her work. When I argue with reality, I lose, but only 100% of the time. That has been huge for me, right? What's the reality and where's persistence come in? All right. So what Seligman's work shows, and this is right from his work, people low in hope and high in permanence and pervasiveness are the ones that tend to collapse under pressure. Explanatory style explains how two people given the same circumstances can either rise to the occasion or go down in flames. This has been studied in many, 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 many situations that are high pressure. People who've survived, like a tsunami or an earthquake, a tornado. It's also been tested in more personal things like divorce. So I don't think anybody ever imagines they're going to divorce when they walk down the aisle, so to speak. But it happens, of course, and sometimes for very good reasons. But people low in hope and high in permanence, pervasiveness, were found to still 10 years after the divorce be kind of singing the blues. All men are no good. All women want is your wallet. Don't trust, blah, blah, blah. But people who are high in hope do some internal work, get some support, adapt their lives, and go on to be reasonably happy and make peace with the divorce within 2 to 10 years. So we do have choices, is part of my message here. So there are 3 aspects of explanatory style that are the most effective, have the biggest effect on us, according to Seligman's 40 plus years of research and other researchers. Seligman labeled them as permanent, personal, and pervasive. So I want to walk you through these because once I learned this, I started to hear my own self-talk differently. All right. So when you're thinking about permanence, pessimistic versus optimistic, how the brain processes what just happened, a pessimist is much more likely to take the stance, this bad thing happened, or I made this mistake, nothing ever goes right for me. What are the strong, that's what I'm trying to say, words in there that we should question or argue with? Nothing ever goes right for you. Like you turned on the light switch and the lights didn't come on. You have running water when you get up in the morning. We in in the United States, we have so much going right for us. We just take it for granted. And then the next word, ever, ever. I mean, as soon as you think about it or question it, you're like, yeah, that's ridiculous. So an optimist is more headed that way right from the beginning because they've made a practice of it. Gratitude practice actually and optimism skills go hand in hand. So that's another area you could explore. Optimists are more likely to make a mistake or have a bad thing happen and say, well, I blew it this time, which immediately leads to it's temporary, and the next time I will do X instead. All right. So that's a very brief explanation of something that's a total game changer if you put it in your life, as is this next P, the 3 Ps, personal. So people who are pessimistic tend to take bad things or mistakes and really carry it around with them and make it very personal, like I'm such a loser and so on. So I was looking for an example, and I like cats, but this is not a dislike of cats, but cats like to dart outside. Indoor cats like to run out the door before you can catch them. So I had a friend that happened to, and so I used that as the example. My cat got hit by a car because I was so careless. Well, okay, maybe I could have put up a baby gate, or maybe I knew that cat was a pistol and I should have been more careful. But I didn't hit the cat with the car myself, so how could I be the only one responsible? So optimists take appropriate responsibility when things go wrong. They learn from their mistakes, in other words, but they also attribute responsibility where it belongs, you know? So an optimistic person whose poor cat got hit might say, but drivers are also careless and they don't pay attention to pets. And the person who recovers the most quickly and healthily from the death of the cat, which is always a very sad experience, is the person who can externalize the appropriate amount of blame. And there's one more thing to blame here, which some of you already see, the cat. You know, the cat is also partly responsible for its demise. So what we want to do is balance the internal and externalization of reasons why things happen, because being all or nothing is not usually the best road to be on. And then here's another example, pervasive, where we take a single thing and then we globalize it. All right. So say I take a job and I'm very optimistic that I'm going to like it and the boss seems great. And then a week into the job, the boss is not great. And I'm getting really, kind of discouraged. And so I start saying to myself, why did I even hope this would be different? All bosses are jerks, which of course is not true. But if I keep telling myself all bosses are jerks, if I make it universal and pervasive, I'm going to be more discouraged than if I give myself a message like, well, my boss is in a bad mood, or maybe my boss is sick, or maybe this is temporary. Now, we don't want to delude ourselves, though. If the boss is in a bad mood for 3 months, then I can be an optimist and still start to conclude this is not somebody I want to work for. But I keep it specific. This boss is not a good boss. I leave the door open to somewhere out there is a better boss. See the difference? That's one of the things I really had to learn, and it made a huge difference. So let's practice in our own minds for a minute. There are workbooks that you can get on how to become more optimistic that are evidence-based, data-driven, usually written by psychologists, where you get practice examples like this, which really helps because our brains have grooves in them. And if you've been more pessimistic than you like to be for a long time, you have a good pessimism groove worn in your brain, and it will take effort and self-conscious practice to start to shift that groove. But believe me, I'm the living proof it can be done. So a man abandons his morning swimming routine during a cold, snowy week in February. What might he tell himself about his exercise program if he's a pessimist? You've probably already guessed that he's going to say things to himself like, I'm such a loser. I never watch out for that word. It's always the red part. I tried 100 kinds of exercise. I don't ever is another red flag, stick to them. But an optimist might say, okay, snowing, February, coming out with my hair wet from the swimming pool, maybe not my best idea. I think I'm going to find an indoor place where I can walk in January, February, March, and then I'll take up swimming again in April. Okay. So they learn from they pay attention to their feelings, they learn from them, they discern, and then they make maybe a different choice. Or maybe they find a buddy to go swimming with because you don't want to disappoint that buddy, so you're going to show up. An optimist will say, well, that wasn't my best idea. Let's do something different. A Christian or a Jewish or a Muslim or a Buddhist optimist might call on their understanding of God and say, like, I cultivate the intention to exercise for the good of myself and my family. Help me. Please help me. I'm going to pray every day before I go swimming that I get myself out of bed and into the car or walk to the pool or whatever. Right. So when something good happens, we've talked so far about like bad stuff, which most of us are quite conscious of. But when something good happens, optimists also think differently from pessimists because optimists take it in. They have a habit, they cultivate a habit of savoring the good. So yesterday I had an experience where my two grown kids, we were having a little birthday outing, and I saw the two of them walking ahead of me together with their heads together talking. And I don't take for granted that just because they're brothers and sisters they get along. But they do respect and like each other. And I just took in that moment. Like, look at the two of them together. Look at them liking each other. Look at them celebrating her birthday in a joyful way. I just took it in. I didn't used to do that. And obviously, I'm still lifted up by it today. So optimists believe that they're instrumental at making or allowing good events. And in fact, I was paying for this experience that they were enjoying. So I took some credit for it. Good job, Kim. Um, Now, another example is like at work, a nursing staff notices a sudden dangerous change in a patient's status, and they notice it in time to save the patient. Afterwards, two nurses explain it to themselves. The pessimist will treat it ephemerally, like it's just luck, but the optimist lets it in. We are such a skillful team. We are so lucky to work together. We are so grateful that we noticed that in time to save that patient, right? So if you come from a Jewish or Christian background, those are the scriptures I'm the most familiar with. There are lots of people who are showing optimism in the scriptures, and I invite you to take a look at some of these. And in the chat box, if you have other people who inspire your optimism, like I would put down Jane Goodall, maybe she really lifts me up, or David Attenborough, the guy who's such a powerful environmentalist. He's amazing inspiration to me. But what other world wisdom traditions or role models might you suggest that we look into? Because if I'm right, Matt, as this is being recorded, you'll be able to see that, and others will be able to see it. And I'd like you to just take 1 minute to put something in there. And Matt, if you see something noteworthy, then interrupt me or tell me about it. So I'm concluding this, and sometimes I just stop right here. So we actually could do that if we have a lot of questions or comments. With Judith Knowlton's comment, I discovered I always have choices, and sometimes it is only a choice of attitude. If I'm imprisoned, like Nelson Mandela was in prison for 17 years, I think, because of his attempts to end apartheid and his politics and so on in South Africa. And yet, when he came out of prison, he was not bitter. He had laid down a lot of layers that made him resilient through what I think we'll all agree must have been a horrible experience. And he went on to lead his country in the abolition of apartheid. This is a very interesting life to read. So there's an example of how a choice of attitude makes all the difference, even in the direst circumstances. I have given you many, many more slides than I knew I would have time to comment on. You now have the foundation of what it takes to become more optimistic. You're going to receive an assessment. You've been encouraged to take other assessments that you'll find online for all free, usually part of academics collecting data for studies. You don't even have to give your name most of the time, sometimes your age or sex or race for funding purposes usually, but be smart. Of course, there's a lot of online garbage, but I'm not worried about giving you the advice to do that. I've taken many of them myself. And you have some resources like Seligman and others like him. You could do a search on YouTube or TED Talk. I usually try to put the word science in it: science of happiness, science of optimism, science of resilience. because then you know you're getting somebody who's not just giving you a pep talk. And I was waiting for a yeah, but in the comments, but it didn't come, so I'll anticipate it. What if you work with or live with a negative Ned or Nellie? Then I put Wonder Woman up here because she's our role model. She has those gauntlets where when the bullets start flying, she puts them up. It's pew, 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 but they bounce off her gauntlets. And you can try your very best to do that with people who are negative. And you can come up with some things to say like, well, I'm sorry that you feel not very optimistic about this outcome for this new project because actually I'm kind of looking forward to it. You can give them gentle feedback. I don't really want to hear that. I don't agree with that. You can think that if you want to, but don't invite me into your drama, so to speak. Um, and the good news, if you do this, is that a ton of studies show that emotions are really contagious, and both positive and negative emotions are contagious. So if you start to practice these skills or deepen them in yourself, people will notice, and you can have a positive impact on a meeting, on a room, on a family, if you can maintain your own optimism, as long as it's not toxic optimism, which I really encourage you to do. Read one article on what constitutes toxic optimism, because that is hugely putting off and it to other people, off-putting, and it can lead to big mistakes in our own discernment. Another test that you can take, this isn't the one you're getting as a handout, this is a different one, is at seemypersonality.com, and that's an online assessment. The one you're going to get as handout is a pen and paper assessment that you can print first. So let me wrap up by quoting Seligman again. This was another game changer quote for me. When there is opportunity to be grasped and there's hope, then things get better. And when there is no hope, then things don't get better. And that's well researched. So he says the pivotal question, and I've used this question in my own discernment to figure out, where should I donate money? What social causes do I want to get invited or active in? What do I want to read or consume in the way of news? And what am I going to really limit as news consumption? Because it doesn't help me with the cause of hope. So what can I do to help the cause of providing opportunity and hope in the world, in my own life, in my family? It's a beautiful discernment question and really helps you kind of decide what you're thinking. So I anticipate that one of your questions might be, is pessimism ever a good idea? I would like to hear your thoughts. I would like to hear your questions. And I'm really hoping that you will look at the PDF of the slides when it comes so you can pray or meditate or journal about some of the slides that I knew we wouldn't have time to cover, but that I felt in due diligence I wanted to give you. All right. So Matt, is there anything here? I'm going to leave the PowerPoint
Yes.
for a minute. And
Yes.
I'm going to look at all of you. Whoops, wait. Um, not again. Wait, am I still here, Matt?
Yeah, you're still sharing your screen.
Oh, thank heavens, because it just left my
I
screen.
just
There we go.
Yeah, I stopped it for you. So,
Thank you.
few things. So as we wrap up here, just got some folks giving examples of individuals from different wisdom traditions that kind of fit what you were inquiring about. Viktor Frankl, Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, a couple ones that I wrote, Thich Nhat Hanh, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Billy Graham, Brene Brown, Eckhart Tolle, all great examples.
All great examples.
So I did put the link in the chat to the survey. If you could please complete that anonymous evaluation for us, I would appreciate your honest feedback. Someone asked, how will we get access to this at a later date? So this is recorded and will be posted to the NAMI Greater Cleveland YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube, type in NAMI Greater Cleveland, we will be the first result that you will see, and we'll probably upload this sometime next week. Other question that we had was, I heard you say something like, don't waste your pain. Please
Yeah.
expand on this.
Oh, I would love to. So this was actually a spiritual director with a good psych background who said that to me. I was doing family of origin work at the time because, as I already told you, I have sometimes suffered from anxiety and depression, and I work on that, and I take medication. So I'm very lucky. And I'm also very lucky that I had this fantastic spiritual director. Director is kind of a misnomer. It's more like a spiritual friend, I would say. And I was really in a lot of pain about family of origin issues. And there were lots of them. And he said, don't waste it. Always use your pain. Your pain is a signal that you need to learn more, or there's some acceptance practice that will be good for you, or you need more alone time, or you should be writing in your journal to get it out instead of ruminating on it. I mean, if I was speaking to you personally, we would generate suggestions for how you wouldn't waste your pain. It's different for everybody. Some people join support groups. Some people would rather be, you know, jump out of a building than join a support group. But then they find an online support group where they can post. And, some people join Al Anon and AA and NAMI, get more active with NAMI. So I mean, it's work. I'm not kidding. I'm in my 60th decade now, and I finally realized that I will really never be done working some of the issues that are the results of my upbringing. And I feel peaceful about that because now I've done enough work that I can say, I know you. I recognize you. You're the voice in my head, possibly of my grandma, who, God love her, was really depressed and there was no treatment available for her at the time, saying, you can't do that. Who do you think you are? And so you learn how to talk back to your pain or ask it for its wisdom. I could go on, but you get the idea.
Right. Not seeing any other questions here. We are almost out of time. So again, you will receive these slides as well as a few follow-up resources in an email from me shortly. And do remember to complete that survey for me. And I'll also post a link in the follow-up email to the NAMI National pre-recorded workshops and lectures that are being provided as part of this conference.
Can you
So
send that to me too, Matt?
yeah,
I would love to see them.
sure. Yeah, I'll send them to you.
Thanks. Can I
Okay.
say one more thing before we wrap up? I know
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
ready to, but
Yeah.
in the slides that you will receive that I did not have time to talk about is one that says A, B, C, D, E. And the previous slides are step by step advice from Seligman, the researcher I've been talking about, on how to argue with your own thoughts. And it's marvelous. It's self explanatory, but this is one of the reasons I really want you to look into the PowerPoint when it comes to you. Thanks, Matt, for the opportunity to be with this awesome group.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. Everyone
My
has a great day.
pleasure. My pleasure. We're all walking each other home. Bye bye, everybody.